Good afternoon and welcome to today's roundtable. Thanks to everyone for being here and for logging on. I want to thank the people who traveled, some across the continent and others across an ocean to be here. We really appreciate this. And we intentionally configured this conversation as a roundtable to be a conversation and not to do the 5-minute rounds thing where we take 4 minutes asking a question and then you run out of time trying to answer the one question we get to. We want to really talk to you. I'm looking forward to this conversation primarily about Native priorities for the Farm Bill. I want to go over some housekeeping matters. If you are participating remotely, members will be able to see you on WebEx and call on you. Just be sure to raise your hand so we can recognize you and make sure you're on the monitor for everyone to see. And I also ask, obviously, that you mute yourself until you are recognized. I encourage all panelists, both in person and online, to raise your hand to be recognized if you want to add a comment or respond to a question, even if it's not directed to you. Finally, please just introduce yourself as you start to speak so that our court reporter accurately picks up who is speaking. And now for introductions. I'll start with Mahina Paishon-Duarte, co-founder of ʻāina Aloha Economic Futures. I also see that Paula Daniels and David Price have traveled from Hawaii to be with us today. Aloha and welcome to you all. I want to defer to the Vice Chair to introduce her guest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We were to have Richard Chalyee Éesh Peterson, who is the Central Council President of Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska, but instead we will have our General Counsel at Central Council Tlingit Haida Indian Tribes, Madeline Sobolov-Levy. Madeline has been with Central Council for a period of time, and we're pleased to have her before the committee as well.
I think I'm going to check with staff here. Should I introduce the rest of them? It looks like the members to introduce the other panelists are not here.
Arrived, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and they can make their introductions later if that's appropriate. We'd like to welcome Kelsey Scott, the Director of Programs at the Intertribal Agriculture Council in Gettysburg, South Dakota. Dustin Schmidt, producer of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, White River, South Dakota, in person. Thank you. Vincent Cowboy, the marketing director of the Navajo agricultural products industry in Farmington, New Mexico. Trenton Kissee, director of the agriculture and natural resource for Muscogee Creek Nation, Claremore, Oklahoma. Ryan Lankford, the chairman of the Montana FSA Committee and Island Mountain Development Group of Chinook, Montana, and Mary Greene Trottier. Did I pronounce that properly? Well, no, how do I do it? Trottier. Well, that's not good enough. Trottier, the president of the National Association of Food Distribution Programs on Indian Reservations, Fort Trotton, North Dakota. Turning to today's discussion, every 5 years, Congress reauthorizes a farm bill. This legislation has far-reaching and multi-year impacts on communities across our country. But it wasn't until the last Farm Bill in 2018 that tribes and Native communities had a meaningful seat at the table. This partnership resulted in 63 tribal-specific provisions in the final bill, from new market opportunities for Native producers to expanding tribal self-determination and self-governance authorities, leading to the Native Farm Bill Coalition, describing the bill as the most inclusive farm bill ever. In short, the 2018 Farm Bill broke barriers, but more work needs to be done. The next Farm Bill is another opportunity for us to collaborate and build on incredible progress and to further advance federal agricultural policy that includes Native priorities. I'm particularly interested in the panel's input in 3 areas: climate impacts on Native farmers, producers, and consumers, expanding the 638 contracting and compacting, and supporting indigenous food systems and nutrition. Before we begin our discussion, I'd like to recognize the Vice Chair for any opening thoughts she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief because I do want to hear a good discussion from our panelists today. As you mentioned, the Farm Bill is our opportunity here in Congress to set national agricultural nutritional conservation forestry policy every 5 years. And so we are back at it again. I'm not on the Ag Committee, but I've been working on my own Arctic Ag. As I'm looking to my friends from Hawaii, you may think that that's a little bit different, but no, it's about how we deal with islanded places as we are in Alaska and as you are in Hawaii, and how we can make these federal policies work for all across the country. As you noted, Mr. Chairman, the Farm Bill in 2018 was a significant win for tribal communities, and certainly the opportunity to expand the Tribal 638 provisions to food distribution projects and projects under Forest Service Tribal Forest Protection Act was significant. We had an opportunity just this morning to hear from the Chief of the Forest Service a little bit further about that 638 contracting program and what more we might need to do to make sure that it works better, and what we need to do in this upcoming Farm Bill. I hope that today's discussion will also cover how tribes can exercise greater food sovereignty, to choose what types of food are incorporated in youth and elders feeding programs, how the application of traditional ecological knowledge can better guide land management, and what more we can do to unleash the economic opportunity that tribal agriculture presents. We do have a great group of panelists here today, and looking forward to the comments that each of you will share. And again, I would just underscore, Mr. Chairman, discussion on expanding the 638 authorities at USDA and how federal contracting and procurement at USDA can further support tribal economic self-sufficiency. And I'm certainly hopeful that Maddie Soboleff-Levy will be able to speak to that when she is able to present. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. I'll start with a quick question for Ms. Duarte. Despite centuries of successful land stewardship and resource management, indigenous conservation practices are not incorporated into USDA's conservation practice standards. What do we do to fix that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Vice Chairman, committee members, and to the tribal leaders here that are represented today. Thank you very much for this opportunity. One of the most important things that we could do for Native Hawaiian producers would be to build upon the success that actually our Alaskan cousins have demonstrated. You know, Alaska Federation of Natives, they responded very strongly and significantly during COVID-19 and set up an entire system for which they created a navigator role to really help Native peoples, communities, organizations, nonprofits to understand the federal funding and resource opportunities that are available, to work with Native organizations and tribes to apply for these monies, and then provide additional wraparound supports to make sure that they are accounting for the federal funding and executing on the stated goals. It's an important gap that needs to be addressed, and we've heard this across all the major islands.
Thank you very much. Vice Chair Murkowski, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do, and I keep mentioning the 638 program, but to give colleagues a little bit of an example, when you think about different ways that we incorporate traditional foods into some of the feeding programs, in Alaska, the Alaska Naval Tribal Health Consortium, the ANTHC, was able to replace non-Alaskan items like catfish. Catfish was part of the food programs that were offered. Well, we don't have catfish in Alaska. But what ANTHC was able to do was replace catfish with halibut and cod in their FIDIPR food packages. So for them, this whole idea of local control made absolute sense. So this is a question that I would pose to Madeline Soboleff-Levy, as well as you, Ms. Trottier. Just share with us the ways that we can allow for greater self-determination over how food is procured and processed for the community feeding programs, and then what it means to tribal producers and tribal economies if 638 authorities were fully expanded to USDA nutrition programs like you have within the FIDEP program. So to Ms. Levy and to you as well here on the panel. So we'll turn to Maddie first.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski, and thank you all. My name is Madeline Soboleff-Levy, and I'm the General Counsel for Tlingit and Haida. President Peterson sends his deepest regrets that he was unexpectedly unavailable today and away with illness. Tlingit and Haida is a federally recognized tribe with over 35,000 citizens worldwide. The tribe serves 19 communities and villages that are spread across 43,000 square miles within Southeast Alaska, and there are recognized communities in Washington State and California as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today. And for Tlingit and Haida, the tribe has been really looking forward to the Farm Bill reauthorization and the expansion, the FDIPR program. The tribe, excuse me, just a moment, I lost myself. So Tlingit and Haida has been able to start to operate greenhouses and has purchased a commercial food processing facility where the tribe is able to process traditional foods such as seal, the halibut that Senator mentioned, other fish products, moose, deer, and foods that Tlingit and Haida strongly believes are important not only for food security, but also for the spiritual and emotional and physical well-being of our communities. And also, as the Senator mentioned, processing through these facilities allows the tribe to prioritize the provision of these foods to its Head Start facilities, to its youth programs, and to elders, and provide them on a regular basis. The tribe has also been able to do this through its catering business, and the tribe would be really, really grateful to see the expansion of 638 authorities.
Senator Daines, oh, sorry, Ms. Trottier, then Senator Daines.
Can you hear me now? Okay, there you go. Thank you again for allowing us to be part of this roundtable and for listening to the issues that are revolving around, especially the 638 and the upcoming Farm Bill. We're very grateful for the provisions that were included, and the 638 is a success story that has elevated 8 tribes and a partnership for allowing fresh, locally sourced foods that are consumed by tribal members and other people that live on our reservations to access the food, and it's been a push for NAFDIPR to include traditionally sourced foods within the food package. The 638 allows it to enhance it. It also eliminates transportation. It offers a fresher source of food for our community members who also suffer from high rates of diabetes and heart disease and hunger. It's real in our communities. And by having the 638 expansion across FDIPR, it would really escalate local producers to have that steady stream and plan ahead and a source of revenue and income and pride for our community members.
Chairman Strauss, thank you. Mr. Lankford, thanks for making the long trek from Chinook, Montana, coming all the way from the High Line, which is, you talk about the Arctic part of our country. We have some of that up in northern Montana too, Lisa. Anyway, as we discussed 2 weeks ago when we had a hearing on priorities, the Farm Bill has a chance to fix some outstanding issues that are making it hard for tribal members and communities to participate and then take full advantage of these ag programs. I've heard time and time again, traveling around Montana, that agencies, federal agencies, can make it difficult and prohibitive for some tribal communities to participate in the Farm Bill programs. The FSA and BIA play a crucial role, certainly in helping ag. You know all about FSA, but they play a really important role in our tribal communities. But I have heard that BIA has been an obstacle. It's hindering farmer participation. So from where you sit, they're up in the High Line of Montana, in your experience, how has the BIA's actions influenced producers on Montana's reservations, and what do we need to do to fix this systemic problem?
Thank you, Senator, and again, thank you for letting all of us be here as a voice from native countries. What I want to address is exactly that, is how and what is out there as obstacles. We as natives, when we talked about some of the key points that you brought up, Chairman, were climate smart activities. When we step back and we look at how these are actually going to be implemented, how do we get boots on the ground to do this? We look at what's in front of us. What are the obstacles in front of us? And one of the big obstacles is the Bureau of Indian Affairs. When we step back and we look at how we as natives have generational, since time immemorial, been stewards of this land from coast to coast. And now we're confined to reservations, to quote unquote Indian land. Even in this definition of Indian land, there is no definition in the Farm Bill. I'd encourage you to create a strong definition of Indian land and what it means. Part of the reason, I think, Senator Daines, that we have such a hard time dealing with the BIA is they act as though it's their land. The Bureau of Indian Affairs acts as it's their land. It's not. They're holding it in trust for me. I own my land. I own my land on a reservation. My nation owns their own land. It's just held in trust, you know, and dealing with that Bureau of Indian Affairs, there is a lot of government oversight there. And when we have to, for example, if we want to engage in an EQIP contract, the Bureau of Indian Affairs will offer us a lease that's restrictive on time and practices. We need to be able to allow some streamlining and not have multiple agencies oversee us when we go through these practices. The government oversight is great to an extent, but it's repetitive and overreaching in a lot of cases. You know, this is an issue, especially to get stuff done in Indian country. Speaking outside with some of the panelists here, my thoughts and my experiences were echoed. You know, talking to Mr. Trent outside, same exact issues with the BIA. You know, one of the things I have written down is that some of the BIA actions are really non-actions. For example, if we back up to the last Farm Bill, I could enroll in ARC PLC, our program, and if the BIA took 7 years to develop a lease, I could go back and get my lease and apply for those payments. Right now, systemically, the system is rigged so that these programs are closing. They have a close date where I have to produce my lease. That lease is produced by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. If the Bureau of Indian Affairs doesn't produce that lease, I don't get a payment. Systemically, I'm being excluded because another government agency is excluding me. You know, I think, Senator Daines, that kind of alludes to some of the major obstacles I see.
Great. Mr. Lankford, thanks for sharing that testimony. It's exactly what we're looking for here. If you're speaking directly to senators here who want to hear it from the ground there. So thank you. Chairman Scott.
Before I move on to Senator Smith, I just want to clarify the purpose and put a really fine point on it. I talked to Mahina about this a couple of hours ago. We need concrete proposals, ledge text by March 31st to submit to the Agriculture Committee and to the, look, I don't expect that we're going to achieve a consensus even on the committee, on the Indian Affairs Committee, but to the extent that we can be rhyming with each other and then over time consolidating our position so that there's one bipartisan Indian Affairs point of view as it relates to the Farm Bill, then we have the best possible chance to enact all the changes that we want. Senator Smith.
Well said.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you organizing this hearing, Senator Schatz and Vice Chair. I have so many questions, but I'm going to just jump right in. First of all, let me say there are, I think, 3 of us who serve on Senate Indian Affairs and also on Agriculture. Me, along with Senator Ben Ray Lujan from New Mexico, and also John Hoeven from North Dakota. And so I think that will be a good, Chair Schatz, that will be a good kind of linkage that we can provide between the 2 committees as we work on what needs to be really strong provisions for native farming in the upcoming Farm Bill. I want to ask a question. This gets a little bit, I think, following on what Senator Daines was asking about, which is issues of access to risk management tools, federal risk management tools for native farmers and ranchers. And we know, I think, that we have not seen, there hasn't been a capacity for high participation. I suspect, Mr. Lankford, that some of the things that you just described for BIA also hold true for some of the challenges around risk management. But we also have, if land is in trust, how do you get the access to credit when the typical way of getting access to credit for farm credit programs is your land? And so my question really to all of you is, could you talk about some of those unique challenges for accessing risk management tools in the farm programs, and if you have any specific suggestions or proposals for what we need to do differently and better?
I guess since I have the mic warmed up, is this still on? So I'm a producer. I happen to sit as a state chairman FSA, but I'm here as a producer. And my livelihood depends on our land. The hard part with credit, when we talk about credit, is how do we access it? That's what you're asking.
Right.
And it's almost impossible to access. When we talk about, and I'm sure you guys have had other farmers come in here and talk about their 5th generation farmers. They've been on their ranch for 100 years. When I step back and I look at my family, 2 generations ago, my grandmother was allotted land. So that's two generations ago, she was allotted land. A generation ago, my father came back underneath the Indian Finance Act and tried to borrow money at our local bank and was denied. So I'm really the first generation that is getting access to capital, and my access is very limited. I go into a bank and they can't collateralize what I have on the reservation. They can't collateralize my land, and in fact, they can't even collateralize my equipment. So what they can collateralize is my insurance. And that's a great tool for all Indians. Mm-hmm. We need to bolster that, and we need to help that level. We need to increase the subsidy amount that we can have on RMA. Some of the things that I look at is for the crop insurance subsidies, the Senate authorized in section 11111, I think there's 5 ones there, they authorized a 90% subsidy share. I suggest that we look at that for all RMA, because it literally is the only way I can borrow money. Mm-hmm. And I know there's a red line that goes around our reservation. I've reached out and had direct conversations with Chopra from the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. We've talked about that, but that line still exists. I think it is crucial and critical that we put a good safety net that we as Native Americans can borrow, because we can't collateralize our equipment, we can't collateralize our land, and it really leads us into a thing. So that's one of the points that I'd like to is to increase that subsidy for Native Americans on Indian land.
Senator, may I add as
Yes.
well? Okay, so from Hawaii Native Hawaiian, so thank you to the good work of 2018 Farm Bill and to the Native Farm Bill Coalition. We really support their work and their ideas around expansion of crop insurance to native crops and native producers. So oftentimes we are placing special emphasis on the major commodity crops, rightfully so, but we can expand this
Yep, I agree.
to native crops and food, not only as, food for meals, but food as medicine, food for education, and so forth, and all the other uses. Another thing is to, building on my earlier point where we want to build off the good success of AFN, is if we get more technical support for regional navigators, right? We're not just advocating for Native Hawaiians, but all Native peoples, then we can start to hedge the risk, right? So we can also provide additional technical assistance to help farmers become loan ready, help them expand on business models and businesses that can be expanded upon and scaled, helping with marketing and so forth.
That's great. Chair Schatz, could I just ask if Ms. Scott, who is with us virtually and is Director of Programs with the Intertribal Agriculture Council, if you'd like to add anything? I know you all have worked on this.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to join in today. It's a privilege and an honor. I'm here as the Director of Programs for the Intertribal Agriculture Council. Also, we representing or standing in for Vice Chair Cole Miller of the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, who is a co-chair of the Native Farm Bill Coalition, which the Intertribal Agriculture Council stewards. I want to really highlight one point before I speak specifically to risk mitigation efforts in Indian country. And we need to be very careful in our language use. It's not that trust land can't be collateralized. It's that banks won't collateralize trust lands. CDFIs are doing a great job at working with Indian country to recognize that it's just a different structure of approaching extending capital and understanding the asset a little bit differently. Specific to risk mitigation efforts in Indian country, towards the end of 2022, the Risk Management Agency at USDA partnered with the IAC to expand outreach on crop insurance. And this really is a tremendous opportunity of a partnership to uplift, because what we're going to be doing through this partnership is recognizing that there is a void in training, credentialing, and offering of risk mitigation tools in Indian country that are specifically informed by the knowledge and the needs from within the community. So through our efforts with this cooperative agreement, we're going to be working on a pipeline of crop insurance agents and adjusters that are rooted right there within our communities that can be doing an even better job of enhancing and outreaching about risk mitigation opportunities. And I think that we should really appreciate any efforts extended towards a recognition for more tribally owned and operated insurance companies being viewed as a key partner and collaborator in identifying very specific opportunity that can exist in addressing some of the risk that is not presently covered by federal crop insurance programs.
Thank you, and I appreciate your clarification on this native CDFIs versus banks. It's a really good point, and actually Senator Rounds and I have done some work on this in Banking Housing Committee, so I appreciate that.
On that note, Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, I want to just thank our panelists for taking the time today to attend the hearing, either in person or if they have to, from the colder parts of our country where they're still getting snow, to do this virtually. I am happy to introduce two of our panelists from the state of South Dakota here with us today. Kelsey Scott is an enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe and currently serves as the Director of Programs for the Intertribal Agricultural Council. You just heard from her to begin with. She is the owner of a grass-fed beef operation on the Cheyenne River Sioux Indian Reservation, where she ranches with her husband and family. Prior to working as the Director of Programs at the Intertribal Agricultural Council, she served as Youth Programs Coordinator and Natural Resources Director for the Council. Also, I'd like to introduce Mr. Dustin Schmidt of White River, South Dakota. Mr. Schmidt currently works and resides on the Rosebud Indian Reservation with his 4 sons. Before managing his own ranch, Dustin worked on the Duck Bar Ranch in Nebraska for 3 years, then moved back to White River, where he worked for Jensen Cattle Corporation for 10 years. Since then, he has managed his own ranch, which he started while utilizing the FSA loan program. For the last 20 years, Dustin has remained involved in his community and volunteered as a 4-H leader. I'd just like to personally thank both Dustin and Kelsey for taking the time to provide their perspective to the panel today, and it's always interesting to hear the perspective of what happens in Indian country with regard to credit, the availability of credit, and perhaps some things that we can do to provide additional credit in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. My understanding is, Mr. Schmidt, you may have something to add on risk mitigation for the panel.
I'd maybe just add, I appreciate this and a chance to talk. One of the things is sometimes I think gets misconveyed is FSA. We're not here to bash anything. I'm not trying to do that by any means. I'm just here to try to help. But like the PRF and the RMAs and those things you asked, like there isn't very many people that enroll in it. It's too expensive, and there's too much risk for us as a producer. I'm just going to use this for an example, but the PRF, a lot of it goes back to a 17-mile grid when you get rainfall. I'm sorry, but I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me to enroll my land into this program and take a chance of making my living just on that risk when you have, it's hard to, it's going to go back to drought monitor issues, and that's a huge problem right now. We're in a 2-year drought. The drought monitor is broken. I'll give you that right now. Like we've been in a severe drought for 2 years, and they haven't had any, according to our drought monitor, it says 0. I mean, we're fine according to the counties that we're coming from. And we got Hawk and Jackson, Bennett counties in severe drought, and the drought monitor says we're fine. So if you want any of these programs like ECP, LFP, PRF, any of them to work, the drought monitor's got to be fixed from day one. So, and in order to enroll into those programs, we got to get that fixed before we'll go to that part of it. I mean, that's what I'm going to look at. Sorry.
Thank you. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you for that information. I think that's so important. Let me talk a little bit about nutrition for the moment. And is it Ms. Trottier? Thank you. I'm going to ask you this question. In Nevada, I'm from the state of Nevada. Many of our tribal communities literally have to drive sometimes 50 to 100 miles just to get access to grocery stores and shopping. And so my question, I guess, for you is, can you address not only the healthy impact, but the positive economic correlation between Indian country participation in food nutrition programs and a healthy lifestyle? And what I mean by that is, and please address it through not only just the FDPIR, but other programs like SNAP that are focused for some of our tribes as well. Can you talk a little bit about that, and has it been effective or not, and what should we be thinking about when those programs are out there and their effectiveness?
Well, I personally operate a food distribution program. Our SNAP offices are co-located in the same building. I think we're one of none. We're the only one in Indian country that has that resource. We also have a fully functional nutrition education center. So we provide a lot of nutrition education to our community and our clients. And I think the nutrition ed benefit that FDPIR recipients receive, they see us every month. They might see us 2-3 times a month. We have shopping centers in many food distribution centers that they're allowed to come back multiple times. So they have the resource to access fresh produce. And the 638 is also another benefit, as Senator Murkowski mentioned, the availability of traditional foods that community members are recognizing as, their historical foods that they've enjoyed throughout their lifetime. And they may have limited access. If you're on a fixed income, you're not able to go out and hunt and fish. Your program can provide that for you. The other program that we operate is the Senior Farmers Market. That allows us to procure traditionally grown fruits and vegetables, and also offers an economic resource for community members who have gardening, and we show them how to preserved foods, canned foods, so they have extra resources to make it through, as Senator Rounds said earlier, those brutal winters. And so every bit of food security we can muster for our communities, it's really important. You mentioned the lack of fresh or lack of access to grocery stores. I know North Dakota, South Dakota, 50 miles there's a lot greater distances to resources in those communities. And if you don't have adequate transportation, you might not have a functioning vehicle. That restriction is there and those barriers are there.
What was the lessons learned from the pandemic?
Food security is more important than ever for tribal communities. It really heightened the need for gardening and preserving foods and saving those resources. Thankfully, we were able to reach out to the community, provide those necessary resources through delivery mechanisms. It was pandemonium for a while. We never seen so many people that came to our facilities and they took everything because there was fear. And the grocery stores, when you don't see any bread on the shelves or those supplies in the store, it creates.
And then what are you seeing now? Is there still as much as a need or not, or can you give me a sense? Let me just say, there are concerns in my state around food nutrition now, and we're seing high need for it. And I'm just curious what you're seeing.
I think there's always going to be a need. There's people that have worked all their lives that are on a fixed income. Their Social Security amounts are set. They rely on the feeding programs to get those nutritional supplements from our feeding programs, and they can't go back to work. They may be handicapped or have some health issues, so they're living off of what they have.
Thank you.
So I think that's always going to be there.
Thank you.
Senator Mullen.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here. I apologize about sliding in late, but I guess that's what we do here. 5 committee hearings in one day is ridiculous. Mr. Kissee, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. I'd like to visit with you a little bit about the beef operation. Obviously, it's something that's near and dear to my heart and something that our tribes are trying to do good in providing a service for our state and for the surrounding areas. I know most of Oklahoma operations have gone through the process of obtaining a USDA stamp. Can you kind of explain that process, how hard it was for you guys to go through it?
Sure. Thank you, Senator Mullen, and to the committee for having us here today. As the Senator mentioned, I work from the Muscogee Creek Nation, and we have a 25,000 square foot USDA inspected meat processing facility. That was largely brought about due to the pandemic. And to speak to your question a little bit, we placed it intentionally in the middle of a food desert as designated by the USDA, which means they're either low access or low income. Or in a lot of cases both, as our county is there in Okmulgee County. And so a lot of times the switchover between FDIPR and SNAP is cumbersome. Our facility does accept SNAP benefits, but there's a lot of issues there with the changeover. So if a tribal citizen decides that they want to switch from FDIPR to now access that fresh food that's at our meat market, it takes weeks for that change to occur. And to speak more directly to the Senator Mullen's question, it was very cumbersome. It was cumbersome to get that USDA inspection. There's a lot that goes into that. Even for an individual entity or a commercial entity, there's HACCP plans that have to be developed, hazard analysis, critical control points. So you have to note all of the safety measures that you're putting into place to make sure that that's a safe and wholesome food product. In many cases, that requires the help of a consultant. There's not a lot of resources out there available to just your average producer that wants to get into meat processing. You have to have a food safety and biosecurity plan. These are all steps that can be pretty cumbersome and pretty overwhelming for folks, as well as your sanitation SSOPs, which outline the sanitation measures that are taken. So as the Senator mentioned, we've been pretty fortunate in eastern Oklahoma. We have 4 tribally owned meat processing facilities now in eastern Oklahoma: Muscogee Creek Nation, Cherokee Nation, Osage Nation, and the Quapaw Nation. And all of us have been able to get the level of inspection that we prefer. However, that's not the case all the way throughout Indian country. There are a lot of situations where a federal inspector is unattainable for a variety of reasons. There are places where maybe it's a remote area where nobody would prefer to work aside from people who are in that community. That's a problem. There are facilities who have to share inspectors, which, leads to a host of problems. You can't really plan your volume. You have to have a USDA inspector on site to harvest or process inspected product. And so if you have to share an inspector with 2 or 3 or 4 facilities in the area, it's very inefficient. You have to kind of plan your days around all the other plants' days. And if you're a new operation, you kind of slide in there at the bottom and you take what you can get. So there are a lot of problems there. It really creates a bottleneck, especially in our rural communities, for the inspection process.
How far behind are you guys in processing? How many days out? And I say that because we make dates. During the pandemic, we were making dates on our ranch a year plus out to get our cattle processed. Where are you at today?
It's a great question. So we're booked out all the way through the end of the fall, September, October. And we regularly get customers booking a year and a half, 2 years in advance so that they can kind of secure that slot.
So are you capable to contract with USDA to perform your own inspections if we were to put language in the Farm Bill to allow you to do so?
Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity for tribes. I think that 638 has proven effective in a lot of other programs. One of them that I will kind of touch on is the Realty Trust Services office at the Muscogee Creek Nation is sort of a hallmark for those programs. And they run that office really well. They're able to meet. They're very agile. They administer that program very well. And it's kind of a model, and it shows that 638 does work, that tribes can administer those programs. In a lot of cases, tribal governments are very sophisticated, and they're able to carry out those programs with no problem. So that was something that I would be in full support of, and in my conversations with them throughout Indian country. I'm also on the board of directors for the Intertribal Ag Council, and so I get to have these conversations pretty regularly, and one of the asks that we have is an expansion of 638 authority throughout all USDA programs, which would include FSIS, and even to go as far as to maybe have a self-governance office within USDA, not necessarily to help tribes, but to help with the federal agency as it sort of navigates that. It's a tricky process. There's a lot of uncertainty, even on the agency side, of what can and can't be compacted and what functions tribes do have the authority to oversee. So I think if there was a touch point there within the agency for USDA staff and programs to go to and understand the ins and outs of self-governance, that would go a long way in affecting that change.
Thank you.
We have a couple of our guests who would like to respond to Senator Mullins' question.
Great, absolutely.
Ms. Levy, then Ms. Scott, then Ms. Duarte, and because it's 3 of you, if we could keep it as brief as possible, because
We might as well throw in Lankford too on it. So.
Sorry? Oh, and Mr. Lankford. Okay, so we have 4. So Levy, Scott, Duarte, and then Lankford.
Okay.
Gunash, how as the gentleman was just sharing, navigating the compliance with some of the HACCP plans and food processing is a significant burden. It's also here in Alaska and in Southeast, the majority of food is really flown in or barged up, and navigating a supply chain that is dependent on those sources was an unbelievable burden during the COVID-19 pandemic. Part of how Tlingit and Haida has been navigating that is building greenhouses where these greenhouses need to be able to withstand up to 100-mile-an-hour winds and 75 pounds per square foot of snow in order to try and ensure that there's local access to fresh fruits and vegetables that are not just fresh fruits and vegetables, but also local traditional foods like Tlingit potatoes. And so expanding the 638 contracting authority would be a huge relief in being able to navigate and ensure that traditional foods and access are able to be provided to tribal citizens in this way. It's tribes who have the commitment to be navigating the challenges of a greenhouse that can withstand those burdens. Tribes have these commitments to their people and their communities, and so Tlingit and Haida would really speak in favor of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scott.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate that one of the best ways for tribes to ensure not only access to programs, but service to their community members is for them to be able to be afforded flexibility around the terms in which they can present these programs to their community members. And I think it really is a key effort that USDA can consider in how we explore the ways that 638 and the expansion of 638 can allow for us to better serve our community members out here in the communities that are impacted by very simple supply chain disruptions, because we're at the very end of that supply chain. I really appreciate
Ms.
all
Scott,
the comments that are being shared.
I'm not sure I know what you mean. You said flexibility in the way these programs are presented. What would that look like? And what is this inflexibility that we're trying to get to or get to solve?
Yeah, I think specifically what I'm trying to get at is when programs are utilizing 638 authority for the tribes to determine what flexibilities need to be extended, that's when we can really address a meaningful variety and array of community-specific issues that may be faced, whether that is need for indigenous foods to be represented in the FDIPR program, or whether that is timeliness in which the food access needs to be addressed and beyond.
Let me add to that too, Chairman. It's the flexibility too, because the makeup of, let's say, Alaska versus Muscogee Creek Nation, where Alaska may be serving their communities and just the indigenous people as a whole, and Muscogee Creek Nation, it's serving the community as a whole, because it's an open reservation where everybody lives among each other, and so they're processing. They could be processing for our local restaurants, much less the individual and the tribal members themselves. And so we need that flexibility to move forward.
Thank you. Ms. Duarte.
Yes, thank you. Similar to Ms. Levy, and this Senator Schatz knows this, but this is for the rest of the committee members. Did you know that for any pork or beef product, our cattle and our pork needs to be shipped offshore to the continental U.S. to be processed and then brought back. So the cost of that lies on the producer. So processing. So that I have two recommendations I want to put forward. The first is target infrastructure investment to support a robust supply chain. So specifically, we need dedicated set aside of USDA funds for activities such as production, processing, milling, warehousing, storage, value add development, and distribution. The second recommendation that I would like to offer on behalf of Native Hawaiians is in the topic of inter-island shipping. There's a lot of costs. There are 8 major islands. There can be more that can be done around there. To provide an additional amount of funding specifically to indigenous farmers and ranchers as an add-on to the reimbursement transportation cost payment program for geographically disadvantaged farmers and ranchers.
Thank you very much. I think Senator Cortez Masto might argue there are 9 major islands, but that's a separate conversation. Mr. Lankford.
Thank you. As we talk about 638 and the food distribution, and especially food processing, in our state, Senator Tester has done a great job of championing local food processing. They have a co-op just started in Havre, which is right near our reservation. He worked through the Farmers Union to get that going. I think that's a great model. Again, Tester knows that, right? He's been there. He lives down Highway 2 from me. But one thing I see is on our reservation, we raise bison. And in order for us to do a handling facility and a kill facility, the costs are so prohibitive because our product is so small. What I would encourage is to look at how we can engage in these processes on a smaller scale. A lot of our native grown, native owned indigenous food sources are smaller scale. We need to either look at grants or extremely low interest loans to get these things off the ground. Again, I said on our egg board for our economic development arm, we procured a feasibility study and we couldn't find that it was feasible because we don't process enough. I think that's a big thing. And then when we look at training our own, we talked about inspectors. We have a great access on all of our reservations. It's called our tribal colleges. You know, when we look at that, I'd like you guys to look at as well as the federal recognized tribal extension program, the FRTEP. Currently it's funded at $3 million. We'd like to look at that, push it to 10, so we can get some research out there, so we can get our own natives inspecting our own meat. I think that's very important.
Mr. Cowboy has a comment, and then we'll turn to the vice chair and then to Senator Lujan.
Well, thank you, senators, and also the vice chair and Senate. I'm Vincent Cowboy, of course. I'm the sales and marketing manager of NAPI, an enterprise of the Navajo Nation here in New Mexico. Our farmland is 110,000 acres. We grow various crops. I think with the past speakers that they pointed out, that USD inspector, I think that was some of our challenge too as an enterprise as well, where for the past 6 years, we didn't have a USD inspector from New Mexico for us to inspect our products to go export or even domestically. So again, expanding that funding or grant to our own tribes for them to be educated so they can actually inspect, again, just like they mentioned, smaller crops that we have, our native foods. A lot of these other USD inspectors now don't know our small crops and how to inspect them. So it's harder. And then the other one was also expanding on the processing and also the distribution. Like rather than sending a full truck, some of our native sisters and brothers have just small boxes and a few pallets to ship, but the cost is still there and it's added back onto the producers. And to have some grant or some program to help those Indian tribes, just like me hearing a lot of these other tribes here, where we can have that relationship from tribe to tribe, like me sending me some of my native food products up to Nevada, same thing to Alaska, and coming back rather than having that freight and costs and then all those inspections added on as well as fees. So that's where I'm coming on, is to expand the funding or grant on the USDA inspectors to educate our own tribes as well. I just wanted to add it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to jump in here because this is a conversation that I had hoped we would be able to have in the context of the Farm Bill. We are looking to do more with our tribes when it comes to reindeer as a small economic development opportunity, but really small. So to your point, Mr. Lankford, and to Mr. Cowboy's comments there, how we can focus this, not necessarily on the bigger productions, because I'm hearing my friend and colleague here share with me some of the realities of big processors and how you deal with the waste aspect of it. But I mean, we are literally talking about a facility, small-scale facility that could be put on barge to go from one islanded community to the coastline, because investing in this kind of infrastructure and locating it then and having to move all that, you lose all of your economies of scale. But this issue of how through 638 compacting, how we can do more with USDA, with training training individuals within the tribes to be those inspectors, seems to me to be an opportunity here for us if we're doing this right. My colleague from New Mexico hasn't gotten to speak yet, so I'll defer. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize. This is great. Senator Lujan.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I think I continue to defer to our Vice Chair. I agree wholeheartedly with this conversation and appreciate what Senator Mullins put on the table with his question, and clearly an interest in all of our states. The need is there. And Vice Chair, I appreciate your recognition and your leadership from the perspective that we need to do this for larger operations and for someone who maybe has a few head to help large and small. And as I shared with Senator Mullins, this is needed across America. What's happening right now is not working, and it's not sustainable. And I would go on to say, as Senator Mullins advocated for home, is that there's not a restriction in this space as well, Mr. Chairman, and that as we look to provide more support for tribes across America, and I'm thinking of New Mexico, that they're able to process just like anyone else. And while we work to make sure that we're able to make those investments and look at strengthening this area, that it's something that will open up more opportunity. I mean, I know in New Mexico, everyone's having to ship stuff out, and they're having to trailer it, but wait for it to get back. And the folks that have a few head of cattle, I mean, they're just, it's hard to even get by for some of those families, especially when we're getting a little older. But nonetheless, I appreciate this, and I don't know if there's anything else that our vice chair would want to add there. Yeah, I want to recognize someone who you already have heard from, and that's Mr. Cowboy, who's a leader back in New Mexico, but has shed light on so many areas that we can be more supportive of the Navajo agricultural products industry and the work that he's done in his current capacity, but also as the COO in a previous life over at NAPI, and the work that they're doing there under Navajo brand as well, Navajo Pride brand, but creating more markets and opportunity. And one of the questions I have, Mr. Cowboy, for you is exactly in that space with the work that you've done and what you've been leading it with initiatives is how can the next Farm Bill support Native producers as they look to expand both domestic and international opportunities for products?
Thank you for that question. Again, I think we go back to that expanding the opportunity for our own tribes to have an in-house inspector. That was one of the biggest challenges for export for NAPI, was inspector. Again, having no inspector for 6 years, we pretty much pawned that on to our customers. And at this point, I mean, times have changed where cost is really going up. And now if I work together with tribe to tribe, just don't want to pawn that off to them for them to have that cost added to them. That was something. Then the other one was also educating our tribes, learning them about the USDA inspection, also learning about these new crops that we have. A lot of these are native crops that a lot of the outside world don't see. Some of our native tea that we have, sumac berries, I know there's some areas, blue cornmeal. Some of those are expanding in some of these smaller farms. Some of these, even these farms that haven't existed for a while, are coming back to life. So we have smaller brothers and sister farmers that are growing and starting to be part of the market. And that's on export. For us, we have exported our dry beans down into Mexico still. We still have the challenges with USDA inspector. Of course, same thing with our alfalfa going abroad. And then now me working with Mexico government to try to get in some blue corn down there as well. So the biggest holdup for me, for NAPI itself, is the USDA inspection, to having that flexibility and also them educating on our native foods as well. For the domestic part, again, we keep hearing about this farm to fork programs across the nation, and where food banks and also the food hubs and also the farmers market are really pushing towards that freshness of food and healthy. But again, we still have roadblocks there as well. Even in our own backyards, there's some schools and some home care that can't even get our products, even though they're less than a mile away from us. They have to be shipped out of here, going to a distribution center and returning. So that freshness is not there no more. So that's one thing that's hurting us. If we can get that inspector and we have that inspected here on the farm, with the nation, we can work directly with our customers and working with the education system and also our healthcare and just going direct. And of course, again, working from tribe to tribe, I think that one has really expanded during the pandemic as a lot of buyers return back to traditional values and traditional foods or medicine. I heard that in this speech earlier about medicine. Yes, food is medicine, and also we need to return back to that as well. And as we start to expand our native foods, because again, our brothers and sisters of Canada, also Mexico, and also here in the United States, we're growing, and our farmlands are continuing to grow and grow. We started off as feet, now we're going into acres, and we're going to be part of this market going forward from here on out. So Thank you.
Is there anyone here that would disagree that opening up opportunities for more of these markets is something we should be focusing on as well? Mr. Lankford?
Yeah, I think, under Section 3 of the trade, the market access program, I think we need to ensure that that funding stays the same or increases. One of the things I think should be also asked is that we have tribal producers be part of those trade missions.
Yeah.
That's what we need. So that's the ask, is that we keep that market access program available and funded, and that we include natives in the trade missions. And when we talk about one other thing about being sovereign, that's key to being sovereign, is that we can expand and reach out for ourselves. And then we can, when we're looking at these inspectors, the other part of being sovereign is that we're using our own people to inspect. I think that's crucial.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I would agree, and I just want to kind of point out something that's maybe missing a little bit from this conversation is that I know all of the facilities in eastern Oklahoma, ours included, is open to the public. And on any given day, 70% of our customers in the retail space do not identify as a tribal citizen. So you're not just investing in tribal communities with these initiatives. You're investing in the surrounding community. As again, we planted our retail facility on purpose in the middle of a food desert, providing access to low-income and low-access families, native and non-native. And so that's a really important data point that I wanted to bring up. And I also think that as we kind of talked about, tribes are uniquely situated because of our ability to educate our workforce. That's something that we've really been talking a lot about in our area, is the need for some workforce development. And as Mr. Lankford brought up, the FERTEP program is a great place to do that. The Muscogee Nation also has a 94 land grant, tribal college there in town. We have the ability to educate our people. We have the ability to educate folks who want to come back and work in those communities where it may be tough to get an inspector because if they're not from the area, maybe it's an undesirable place for them to live. But through scholarship programs, education programs, and our land grant institutions, we're able to educate that workforce, get those folks there trained to come and work in our facilities as inspectors or as labor. As all of you probably know, there's sort of a dearth of that whole animal nose-to-tail butcher. That skill set doesn't exist currently. And so we're all kind of robbing labor from each other, which doesn't help anyone. Those 4 plants in eastern Oklahoma, we do our best not to poach labor from each other, but that's just an area that's very thin. Because it's been so specialized and mechanized and on an assembly line type approach that you don't have somebody who knows and who has either the education as a meat scientist to understand value add processes and water activity and things like that. That's a need on one hand, the education, but also the skilled labor force that can take that animal, that whole animal that walks into the facility and cut it up into retail cuts that a family can use. So I would advocate for some extended resources there in the workforce development aspect as well.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. If I may ask President Trottier, President, with all the work that you've been doing and your understanding in this space, what are your thoughts about the inclusion of more traditional and tribally produced foods in the FDPIR, I think it's called FDPIR program? What are your thoughts with that and making the 638 program to allow more tribal nations to participate and improve food access?
Well, we've had great success with the 8 tribes that we've had in the first round of funding. COVID kind of prevented a few tribes from applying because they were trying to feed families. I think the interest has peaked, and I think tribes are really interested in being able to source their own food and feed their own food to their communities. It's kind of a no-brainer. You can eliminate the need for transportation to and from and back to the tribes, where you can have a locally sourced product delivered right to your door. So I think the need is there. It creates economic resources for tribes that if they continue with this and we have a steady stream of funding, I think you'll get more interest and we'll have a healthier product.
I appreciate that. And within these programs, families who qualify on the food program side, they can purchase salt and sugar, right? That's an allowable expenditure if there's a food program the families are participating in?
Under the SNAP program,
Yes.
you can, but not under FDPIR.
So one of the points I want to make here is not necessarily for salt and sugar, Mr. Chairman, but on herbs, and namely traditional herbs, is when we're talking about food that you want to eat or that's culturally appropriate, that kind of restriction doesn't make sense to me, especially if you can buy salt and sugar. but there's other more appropriate herbs that, well, you know where I'm going with this. I just hope that this is something that we can look at, and it's a small change, but I think it's a change that will make a big difference. And again, that represents, more appropriately respects sovereignty. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to just let my colleagues know that a couple of the issues that we've been talking about, we've been working on at the Ag Committee level. I've been working on legislation to address some of this, particularly the need mentioned to allow assist tribes in becoming USDA certified for food and food safety inspection service. So we have, we're drafting language on that right now. Also on figuring out what more we can do to assist tribes with technical assistance or grants to do some of the work that they need to do. For example, it can be prohibitively expensive to have somebody come in, sometimes traveling days in order to get to the location they need to get to in order to do the certification, trying to assist with some of those costs as well. So the Native Farm Bill Coalition has been incredibly helpful as we've been working on this language, and I just wanted to mention that. Would love to work with all of you on that if you're interested. I also want to mention that because Senator Lujan has been such a strong advocate for this, looking at ways that we could expand 368 authority. We're working on language that would do this, to expand 368 authority to all of the FDIPR programs so that tribes can plan and conduct and administer them, including native food. And so, again, I just would love to work with all of you on this. I think there's just so much opportunity. I want to just mention one other thing because our colleagues here were bringing this up, which is ensuring that the USDA, when it is running trade missions or doing food promotion activities for building overseas markets, that it is truly including tribes and native producers in that work. And, in the 2018 Farm Bill, we directed the USDA to support greater inclusion, and unfortunately that hasn't really happened. And so we're continuing to work on this. There's, like all things, it's always complicated, but we think that there's some additional things that we can do, because you're absolutely right. If you're not able to participate in trade promotion activities, then you're missing opportunities to build a big market. And so I wanted to just mention that. One other thing I think is important is that if we are going to be creating pathways to market overseas native food, it's important that it is native food. And this is a big issue in Minnesota, where we're quite concerned about Monoman wild rice and how it is being developed in other places. It's cultivated rice. It is not the same thing, and we want to make sure that we're providing protections for native food as we're doing that marketing. Those are a couple. If anybody wants to comment on any of that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Mr. Lankford and I had a conversation about this very thing in the hallway, and the old terminology was the country of origin labeling, and how kind of problematic that was. That it was mandatory, and it led to maybe some retaliatory tariffs and things like that. And I know the new push is that it's voluntary, and so maybe we can avoid some of those things. But I think it's very important when you start talking about the traceability aspect of that. And I know Éesh just put out a new rule, particularly for us dealing with the livestock side, and that's something we've been looking heavily at. But I think it's important to note that if something says that it's native produced, native grown, native owned, that we make sure that it is. And so I think while we're able to keep those things voluntary to avoid some of the other issues that would complicate that matter some, I think it's vitally important that we make sure that we have not only the ability to ensure that those are native grown, native produced, and authentic products, but also the funding that would go with that to implement those programs. Because, for example, with livestock and the traceability stuff, the requirement of an RFID tag, that's going to rest almost entirely on, the cost of that's going to rest almost entirely on the cow-calf producer, while the end user, the retail, the processing and the packing house is going to see the benefits of that, because in the end, they're the ones that are going to be able to provide that data to the consumer and collect the value add there. And so meanwhile, the cow-calf guys having to keep track of all these records and wonder who has access to them, bear the expense of the tag and all the work that goes into, putting the tag on and reading the data. all that cost is borne up front, and all the benefit of that is seen on the back end of that. So I think it's very important that we ensure that producers that are going to be in charge of the bulk of that data collection and verification see the benefit of that end result. Thank you.
Go ahead, you first.
So, again, Senator Tester from our state, he's an organic farmer, as am I. You know, and part of that organic certification is part of the story, right? Is part that we can convey to the people buying it, where it came from, that it is safe, and that you can trace it back to where it came from. And I think as we look towards branding stuff as native owned, native produced, that is another way for us to diversify.
Right.
We really need to be able to diversify and bring in extra streams of revenue so we can be compensated for the extra that goes into this. So I think the labeling is something that would definitely help us out in native country.
May I, Senator? So, I absolutely agree with what my colleagues have just stated. And, you know, the Farm Bill makes me really excited about the opportunities because there's so much opportunity. It's not just about agricultural production, right? It's about nutrition. It's about forestry and conservation. And so kind of just to circle back to a native idea that transcends all native peoples in the 50 states is the recognition of our ancestral systems and our lands being vital to the perpetuation and advancement of our knowledge systems, right? Why is that important? Because today we know that we need traditional ecological knowledge to help solve for some of the major climate issues that we're facing, right? So to have the ability to research the true cost accounting. I want to advocate for true cost accounting methodologies to really understand and evaluate the conservation benefits, the ecosystem services that native approaches of conservation brings to this entire arena.
I'm glad you said that because I've been thinking about what we talked about earlier today, but also more generally, the Farm Bill, the BIA, the USDA, and it becomes a question of, are we going to continue the legacy of the United States government's policy of assimilation, right? And an assumption that goes into every interaction with Native people, particularly on Indian country, but in Hawaii and elsewhere, that the knowledge is in the possession of the federal government, right? And that you have to ask permission at every step of the way, even if it's your land in trust, right? Even if it's your knowledge that has been ignored, right? That even though you can manage something better than the federal government has, that still they're the possessors, not just of power, but of knowledge. And I think one of the things that we want to change over time is just to open up a little aperture here to say, these are not Native people with their handouts, please help us. But we actually already know what we're doing, and would you let us unleash our creativity, our knowledge, our collective wisdom, and our work ethic. And I think that obviously this has to manifest itself in legislative text, but I think one of the most important aspects of the Farm Bill is who gets to decide what happens next, right? And one of the basic principles of sovereignty and self-determination is that it's your land. And I just think that's an important principle that is the bedrock of whatever we propose to the Agriculture Committee. Mr. Lankford.
So, Chairman, on that breath, under Title 8 under forestry, I propose that we insert language in there that acknowledges our sacred places. I think underneath of that title, we can insert language where we talk about our sacred places that are not only on our own reservations, but again, we were coast to coast. We have sacred places all throughout the nation. And I would ask that there be a cooperative management agreement for federal forests that are adjacent to reservations. That's the ask. The other ask is that as we try to preserve our heritage, that one of the things, and we talk about conservation and we talk about EQIP and we talk about CSP, when we go to engage these on our own reservations, we have a tribal historic preservation office. The gentleman on my reservation, Michael Blackwolf, He takes great pride in what he does. And his jurisdiction doesn't end at our reservation. It extends beyond that. But when we even try to do business on our own reservation, what I would like to ask in this farm bill is that there's a line item, a payment schedule for him to do his job on our reservation. Right now, when I go as a producer to do my equip, I'm having to pay him, or my tribe is having to waive that fee for him. That's the ask, is when we look at this cultural, how do we protect it? How do we push that to say we want to be co-managers of what's out there that was historically ours? That's the ask.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask Maddie Levy to speak to this issue of tribal co-management, because this has been something where, again, you've got agencies that are maybe saying the right thing, but in terms of practice, because right now USDA is claiming that they've got the authority. The authority already exists for the tribes in management of forestry lands through cooperative agreements or alternative funding agreements. But we're finding out, and again, I had a chance to speak with the chief of the Forest Service this morning about just exactly this. It's not necessarily right in line with supporting the tribal sovereignty and the self-determination, because you have limitations on I guess nexus. The tribal land has to be immediately adjacent to the Forest Service land. So I know that in the Tongass, Central Council is trying to put together a co-management arrangement with regards to a visitor center at probably the most significant glacier there in Southeast at the Mendenhall. There's no Tlingit culture or history that's being shared at this very significant visitor facility. And I don't know, Ms. Levy, if you want to speak to this issue of co-management and how it says the right thing in statute, but we're not necessarily able to implement it.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. I would love to. You're really spot on that the Mendenhall Glacier Visitor Center is a really significant place in Southeast Alaska. And right now, if you were to go attend and walk through, you would see very little of Tlingit and Haida people. And in fact, President Peterson has a really unfortunate story where when staff were asked about that, they told the visitors that, well, the Tlingit people really didn't have anything to do with the glacier, and that's really inaccurate. There are so many stories of clans with traversing glaciers, there's a lot of cultural connection there and a story to be told. And you're right, Tlingit and Haida has been pursuing co-management of this space. The promise of co-management and co-stewardship has been very meaningful to the tribe. And while it is the promise is a step in the right direction, there are several challenges. And it is that the existing authority is limited in scope. The requirement to be adjacent to tribal trust lands is really prohibitive for Alaska. Tlingit and Haida is very pleased and happy to have received the second fee to trust application that has been granted in Alaska in just back in November of last year. But that proximity between the Mendenhall Glacier Visitor Center and the Juneau Indian Village all the way downtown is not there. And so expanding the 638 authority for the Forest Service outside of the Tribal Forest Protection Act would really allow for the inclusion of activities and the management of the visitor center and other places that are so important, because as the other folks have been testifying here, These lands are indigenous lands. There is a story to be told, and more importantly, there is active management to be done based on the traditional knowledge that our communities have and that our communities are ready to be utilizing, but the barriers need to be addressed.
Thank you.
I'm going to call on Senator Lujan and then Senator Smith, and we'll make some concluding remarks. And Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Scott, are you still with us virtually?
Yes.
My one question I have for you that came to me and came to my attention with a recent conversation with a governor of a pueblo in New Mexico was surrounding contract support costs for tribes. And my question to you, with your understanding, is it's what I was told is that USDA does not provide contract support costs for tribes when they administer self-governance programs. Is that your understanding?
I would have to do a little bit of investigation to verify, but that sounds relatively on point with my understanding.
Do you have thoughts regarding support for contract support costs, or anyone here, as the conversation furthers with 638 initiatives, but especially in the area of contract support costs? And the reason here is, well, there was a federal disaster within lands, and the tribe is taking full responsibility with administering the program 638. There's no support on the contract side, right? And I'm seeing a lot of yeses around the room. But that seems like a missed opportunity to encourage that support and that activity for that management. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Ms. Scott, that you might be able to add to the conversation about the inclusion of that in the Farm Bill?
Yeah, I think that we could really reflect on the fact that the historical underservice and lack of access to USDA programs has helped to perpetuate that void of wealth in many of these communities. And any chance that we can utilize the administering of these programs by the tribes themselves as a vehicle for enhancing increased access to programming, or even reducing the cost share that is incurred by the tribes in accessing programming, I think we can really start to advance our communities towards parity in addressing that wealth gap that exists.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
I want to thank all of the panelists. I want to thank the staff and also the guests of the panelists and the members. This was one of the most constructive 90 minutes that we've spent together as a committee. We've got some homework now, all of us, which is to take all these wonderful ideas. And I know most of you already have this stuff pretty well formulated, but we still have a job of collating, curating, prioritizing, and then coming together as a sort of political unit to make sure that as we move forward with a farm bill, and we should, that Native communities are represented for the opportunity in front of us. Sure, there are needs, but I want us to think of this as, Mahina and her guests and I were talking about the kind of resurgence in Native Hawaiian farming, and I think this is a pure observation because I scarcely have planted anything in my life. But it's fun now. There's a hope to it. There's a joy to it. And so although it is important to identify needs, although it is important to identify challenges, I think what is going to get us over the hump and into the future is all of the opportunity and all of the talent in this room and across the country. So thank you very much. This roundtable is adjourned.